All right. So, yeah, handle submit's getting a little long here. Yeah. It is a method, yeah. It's a method that's built into all DOM elements, yep. Exactly right. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Well, class list isn't. Class list is a property. Class list add is a method, right? So add's actually a function, right? So it has parentheses in there. So yeah, class list is technically called a property. The add is actually a method, yeah. So handle submit's getting a little long for me. It's doing too many jobs. This is awfully repetitive, creating these two spans. So I think I want a function whose job is just to do that, just to create these spans. Never mind how it's all going to fit together just yet. Let's just make a function that does that thing. So I tend to overthink my function names. I think of what we're doing here as keeping our user interface in sync with our data. Right? Our data is this list of flicks. And when we get new data, we want to update our UI. And probably because I've already used React before, I think of that as rendering. So I'm rendering my changes to the actual page. So I'm going to call this function renderProperty because its job is to render each of the new properties to the page, whether that property is the name of a Chris or the name of a movie or the year it came out or my star rating or whatever. I'm going to have one function that does that job. It renders a new property to the screen. So I'm going to call it that. So const render property. And its job is going to be to create a span of some kind. Const span equals document.createElement span. Do some stuff and then eventually return that span. So that's what I want it to do. I need an equal sign here and the word function. So that's the idea. It's going to do all that stuff. So it's going to add a class. It's going to add some text content. I'm not going to call it flick span, though, just span, because I'm going to reuse it. So what information does this function need from the outside in order to be able to do its job? In other words, what arguments do I need to pass in? Yeah, the class is going to be different depending on which property it is, right? What else is going to be different? What's going to be different between, say, the name of the flick and the name of the person? So yeah, so the say again?
Yeah, the text field value.
Yeah, so the actual value, which is what's getting set to the text content, right? That's going to be different, and the name of the class is going to be different for each one, right? So that's the information we need from the outside, so those need to be passed in as arguments. So the first one is the name of the field or the name of the property, and the other one is the value of the field or property. So I'm going to call these arguments name and value. Seem reasonable? So the name goes where? That's the class, right? So instead of the string name, it's the variable name. And the text content gets set to whatever the value was, right? And that ought to do it. So let's just test this function in isolation before I go back and start replacing it with all of this. If we have any errors in that function, I want to catch them early before I've gone and blown away all this stuff that already works. So since we have our developer tools, we can do that very easily. So let's go to our developer tools and just call renderProperty and see what it does. Go to our console. Let's call renderProperty. Yeah, of course, we've already tested it this morning. Doesn't have to be name or Chris or anything like that, does it? Could be anything. We just need some sort of name and a value for that name. So, oh man, I need name tags still, sorry. Yes, Matt, you were in the front row yesterday, right? No? Okay, I'm lying. I knew that. How's it going, Matt? Sitting right where you always sit. Cool. Nice hair. You have a lot of it. I have considerably less. So, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? Applesauce? Breakfast. Oh man, I called applesauce something funny as a kid. Oh, I remember. I called it bobbin. I have no idea why. Look at that. I get back to span with a class of breakfast and a text content of bobbin. Not yet. So right now we just got this span factory, right? Just spits out spans. It's up to us to do something with it afterward. So yeah, that's a step in the right direction, right? So you get it? So that could also be which Chris Hemsworth. And it would give us what we're looking for. Piece of cake. So now that we've made this function that does what we wanted it to do, we can start actually using it down here. So we no longer need to create the span or add the thing or set the text content. That's all going to happen in one step. So let's just get rid of all this nonsense. Let's just call const, which one was this? Flick span equals render property. What's the name? Name. What's the value? Right out of the form, right? f.flickName.value. You dig? So replace all of this with const Chris span equals render property. This time the field is Chris. The value is f.chrisName.value. And then this stuff works the same as it did. So we've simplified this quite a bit, assuming that I didn't screw up. Let's give it a try. Enter flick. Star Trek. What was this? Into the Darkness. Was that that was the third one, right? What was the second one? No, it was the second one. Third one was With a Vengeance. No, that was Die Hard. Yeah. Beyond, you're right. That was Pine. Totally works. So you see the value in extracting that out, and you see what we did there. We called that function. That gives us the span. Then we add it to the page after we got it, right? So one thing at a time. We got to have the span before we can add it to the page. Bake an apple pie from scratch. First you must create the universe. All right. We good? So what did we do here? This was all refactoring, right? It still works the same as it did before. We just restructured our code. So extract render property function.
So render property is the thing that adds them to the list.
All it does is generate the spans. Yeah, it just creates a...
But then the handle submit is what takes the span list and then adds them to them.
Right, right. So render property just gives us a span, and then we create the list, and then we append the span right here. So the span isn't even on the page yet until we do that. So the span, if you look at the result, it's this. So on the page, I want the title of the movie and the name of which Chris it was to be inside separate elements so that I can style them separately with CSS. So I'm creating whole new elements on the page for them. So here they are. So these are the things that I'm creating on those lines.
Otherwise, we like what's it called, string cancellation.
Right.
If you edited one, same thing would happen to the other.
Well, it's more that I couldn't style them separately. I couldn't make one of them red or one of them have a border around it or whatever, because any selector I would come up with would target the same thing.
They want them to exist side by side but separately.
Right.